All right, so a perennial question here has been what has gotten us into this war in the first place? Like, what caused the war? And I want to give a shout out to one of my viewers, ML Harden. I've had a lot of conversations with ML Harden, as I have with Steve Osborne and Cheryl and Newt, and a number of you all have. And if I left you out, please don't feel bad or anything. But there's a number of you who have interacted and helped me understand what's going on. I think that what ML Harden 1822 said here is probably right as far as what has motivated the war, what has gone on. And you'll hear the propaganda points from Putin, and it doesn't quite register, it doesn't quite make sense. But I've heard something similar to this in a couple of different places, and I'm not showing you data or anything, but this is just my thought about what's going on. Okay, and I'm going to read, and I'm going to, like, if he misspelled something here or there, like if you're video or putting a voice into it, okay, that's fine. I'm not worried about it. Excellent analysis. You hit it all right on the head this time, Prof. Thank you. Subject change. Remember that I've been attempting to understand the why question regarding this disastrous invasion. And we've talked back and forth about this, like what actually is causing this? What is motivating Putin? Why did he do this in the first place? Well, this morning I watched a video that suggested an answer. I had to think on it a bit, but it goes something like this. Russian peoples having family and relatives in Ukraine have visited them in Ukraine and have seen the differences in how the Ukrainians live and the freedoms that they have. Now there is a significant difference. In some ways, they're very similar. Culturally, they're pretty similar. Legally, they're largely similar, although Russia has become far more authoritarian over time. Corruption is pretty similar in both countries. There's a shared heritage in some meaningful ways. The language is not that different, although it's different, maybe like a Spanish and Portuguese, if I have my understanding correctly, or what the British might think that I do to the English language. But there are some differences. So they've seen the differences in how they live and the freedoms that they have. And the freedoms are significantly different. Like Ukraine is moving headlong western. They're moving into a European orbit. And Russia is still in the old-timey Russian kind of space. Ukrainians also have a different frame of mind, and that's true. I've detected that quite a bit when I've talked to a Russian or a Ukrainian. Russians have gone home and understood that they do not have the same type of lives as their relatives in Ukraine. Ukraine is changing over to the Western way of thought, while Russia continues to subjugate its people and does not adhere to Western logic. Therefore, Russia had to invade and take over Ukraine to force the Western thinking peoples to leave or vanish. That's really an interesting thought. Now, I've seen another commentator or commentators say something similar to this, like the big threat to Russia was not that Ukraine was going to do anything to them militarily. It was that there is they can't coexist right next door to somebody who has all these freedoms or is moving this direction, and when they're trying to stay where they are. So they're a threat just by their existence, which makes the Ukrainian genocide make sense. What they're trying to do to Ukrainians, it makes sense through this lens. I don't know that this is the only thing or this is right. This is just my guts telling me ML Harden is onto something. If Russia had been successful, problems no longer exist. But Ukraine fought back, and Russia is desperate to continue its way of life that's disappearing right before their eyes. Simply put, the invasion was a desperation move to retain a dying way of life. Russians that have left don't want to return to the same way of living and now understand what freedoms are really like. Now, that's another thing that's really interesting about this analysis. You had 1 million men flee from the country. They're getting to these other countries like, whoa, what happened? How do we, like, I grew up in New Jersey and then I moved south and I was like, wow, people don't live like this everywhere else. I mean, it was very different of an experience just within my own country. So let alone going from Russia to some other country somewhere in Europe or Asia, they're experiencing something different. let alone the brain drain of a million men that just are trying to not get into the war. A bit long-winded, but I hope you get what I'm attempting to explain. I do, ML. You are awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Russia had no choice. It was do or die situation for the Russian elites. Your thoughts? My thoughts are that you are onto something, and I would chime in with you. Glory to Ukraine, condemnation to Russia. This is really good thinking. Thank you for sharing that. And folks, if you have other things to share, please do. I mean, I'm all ears. We're all growing together. Let's grow together. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and thank you for caring about Ukraine.